how does the changing legal landscape impact the rail industry? And I guess in thinking about that, there are three basic topics that come to mind. One topic, of course, is liability, and of course, if there's any sort of accident involving a railroad, whether it's a grade crossing collision or derailment, even an injury to a railroad worker, then you're going to have lawyers involved, and railroads are generally viewed as having deep pockets, so they're attractive targets for litigation. And this is probably a trend that's not going to go away. We have a lot of potential for railroad injuries given the nature of the profession and also the exposure that the public has to railroads. So we have accidents with passenger trains. That's obviously another critical area for the railroads. So the liability issue is definitely forcing the railroads in certain directions. I see that largely as a factor that leads the industry to withdraw as much as possible from exposure to the public, for example, in operating passenger trains. Another legal area that is in the forefront today is regulation, both from mostly at the federal level, but to some extent at the state level as well. And the railroads are federally regulated in a number of different areas. Federal Railroad Administration has broad responsibility for rail safety. The Surface Transportation Board still has some impacts on economic regulation of railroads, and the other DOT administrations like the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration are getting into the Regulatory Act to some extent as well. So as time goes by, we see more and more safety regulation of the railroad industry, and we can argue that some safety regulation is certainly appropriate and beneficial when it's reasoned and thought out in an objective fashion. But we also have a tendency for things to be done for political reasons, and one of the possible examples of that here is the positive train control system that the railroad industry is implementing at this point in time. I think was hastened by political forces. The push for the railroads to adopt the advanced braking systems on freight trains carrying crude oil and certain other hazardous materials in unit quantities are another possibly politically motivated regulation that the industry argues doesn't really make technical sense. We also see the railroad industry having to deal increasingly with not in my backyard type opposition as the industry seeks to expand facilities or build new facilities, implement new services. There's an increased amount of opposition from the public, and of course this takes place in in the legal framework. The Endangered Species Act, the NEPA regulations, and others can all be used to halt or delay rail projects, making them potentially unfeasible or uneconomical.